Student protesters in The Hague, the 20th of November 1969. Media campaigns focused on the plight of the Biafrans intensified internationally in the summer of 1968. By the Biafran leadership, and then around the world, the pogroms and famine were classified as genocide and compared to the Holocaust. Hypothetical Judaic origins of the Igbos were used to bolster comparisons with Jews in Germany. In the international press, Igbo refugee camps were compared to Nazi extermination camps. Humanitarian appeals differed somewhat from place to place. In the United Kingdom, humanitarian aid used familiar discourses of imperial responsibility. In Ireland, advertisements appealed to shared Catholicism and experiences of civil war. Both of these appeals channeled older cultural values into support for the new model of international NGOs. In Ireland, public opinion identified intensely with Biafra, as most of the Catholic priests working in Biafra were Irish who naturally sympathized with the Biafrans, who they saw as fellow Catholics struggling for independence. The Irish journalist John Hogan, who covered the war, noted, "The threat of famine, combined with an independence struggle, had an almost irresistible political and emotional impact on Irish public opinion, which became hugely supportive of the regular airlifts, via the offshore Portuguese island of São Tomé, of food and medical supplies to the beleaguered infant republic. The use of famine as a conscious tactic by the use of the federal government, who wanted to starve Biafra into submission, provoked parallels with the Great Famine of Ireland of the 1840s, while many Irish people saw a parallel with Igbo struggle for independence with their own independence struggle." The pro-Biafra British journalist Frederick Forsyth started covering the war in the summer of 1967 for the BBC, became angry at the pro-Nigeria stance of the British government and resigned in protest in September 1967. Returning as a freelance journalist in 1968, Forsyth worked closely with the Irish Holy Ghost Fathers to collect information about the famine, and whose dispatches from Biafra had an immense impact on British public opinion. In Israel, the Holocaust comparison was promoted, as was the theme of threat from hostile Muslim neighbors. The Biafran War presented Westerners with the notion of starving African children. The Biafran famine was one of the first African disasters to receive widespread media coverage, enabled by the proliferation of television sets. The televised disaster and the rising NGOs mutually enhanced each other. NGOs maintained their own communications networks and played a significant role in shaping news coverage. Biafran elites studied Western propaganda techniques and released carefully constructed public communications in an intentional fashion. Biafran propagandists had the dual task of appealing to international public opinion and maintaining morale and nationalist spirit domestically. Political cartoons were a preferred medium for publicizing simple interpretations of the war. Biafra also used push polling to insinuate messages about Nigeria's inherent bloodthirstiness. Novelist Chinua Achebe became a committed propagandist for Biafra and one of its leading international advocates. On the 29th of May, 1969, Bruce Mayrock, a student at Columbia University, set himself ablaze at the premises of the United Nations headquarters in New York to protest what he viewed as a genocide against the people of Biafra. He died of his injuries the following day. On the 25th of November 1969, musician John Lennon returned the MBE he had been awarded by Queen Elizabeth II in 1964 in protest against British support for Nigeria. In his letter to the Queen returning the MBE, Lennon wrote, "Your Majesty, I am returning this in protest against Britain's involvement in the Nigeria-Biafra thing, against our support of America in Vietnam, and against cold turkey slipping down the charts. With love, John Lennon." Quail Oilfield Incident. In May 1969, a company of Biafran commandos raided an oil field in Quail and killed 11 Saipem workers and Agip technicians. They captured 3 Europeans unhurt and then at a nearby Occupy Field Development Biafran commandos surrounded and captured 15 more expatriate personnel. The captives included 14 Italians, 3 West Germans, and 1 Lebanese. It was claimed that the foreigners were captured fighting alongside Nigerians against Biafran troops, and that they assisted Nigerians in constructing roads to aid them in their operations against Biafra. They were tried by a Biafran court and sentenced to death. This incident caused an international uproar. In the month that followed Pope Paul VI, the governments of Italy, the United Kingdom, and the United States of America mounted concerted pressure on Biafra. On the 4th of June, 1969, after receiving a personal direct mail from the Pope, Ojukwu pardoned the foreigners. They were released to the special envoys sent by the governments of Ivory Coast and Gabon and left Biafra. Legazzi. Atrocities against the Igbos. A severely malnourished woman during the war. The war cost the Igbos a great deal in terms of lives, money, and infrastructure. It has been estimated that up to 1 million people may have died due to the conflict, most from hunger and disease caused by Nigerian forces. More than 500,000 people died from the famine imposed deliberately through blockade throughout the war. Lack of medicine also contributed. Thousands of people starved to death every day as the war progressed. The International Committee of the Red Cross in September 1968 estimated 8,000 to 10,000 deaths from starvation each day. The leader of a Nigerian peace conference delegation said in 1968 that starvation is a legitimate weapon of war, and we have every intention of using it against the rebels. This stance is generally considered to reflect the policy of the Nigerian government. The Federal Nigerian Army is accused of further atrocities, including deliberate bombing of civilians, mass slaughter with machine guns, and rape. Igbo nationalism. The first generation of Igbo nationalism began to develop in the immediate aftermath of the war. Ethnic minorities in Biafra. Ethnic minorities, Ibibio, Ijaw, Ikwere, Eche, Ogoni, and others, made up approximately 40% of the Biafran population in 1966. The attitude of ethnic minorities in Biafra towards the conflict were initially divided early in the war, having suffered the same fate as Igbos in the north, held the same fear and dread as Igbos. However, actions by Biafra authorities suggesting they favored the Igbo majority turned these attitudes negative. Great suspicion was directed towards ethnic minorities and opponents of Biafra, with combining exercises conducted to sift these communities for saboteurs, or Sabo, as they were commonly branded. This brand was widely feared, as it generally resulted in death by the Biafran forces, or even mobs. The accusations subjected entire communities to violence in the form of killings, rapes, kidnapping, and internments in camps by Biafran forces. The Biafran Organization of Freedom Fighter, BOF, was a paramilitary organization set up by the Civil Defense Group with instructions to suppress the enemy and engaged in combing exercises in minority communities.
Minorities in Biafra suffered atrocities at the hands of those fighting for both sides of the conflict. The pogroms in the north in 1966 were indiscriminately directed against people from eastern Nigeria. Despite a seemingly natural alliance between these victims of the pogroms in the north, tensions rose as minorities, who had always harbored an interest in having their own state within the Nigerian Federation, were suspected of collaborating with federal troops to undermine Biafra. The federal troops were equally culpable of this crime. In the Rivers area, ethnic minorities sympathetic to Biafra were killed in the hundreds by federal troops. In Calabar, some 2,000 Efiks were also killed by federal troops. Outside of Biafra, atrocities were recorded against the residents of Asaba in present-day Delta State by both sides of the conflict. Genocide question. Legal scholar Herbert Ekwe and other academics argued that the Biafran War was a genocide for which no perpetrators have been held accountable. Critics of this position acknowledge that starvation policies were pursued deliberately and that accountability has not been sought for the 1966 pogroms, but suggest that claims of genocide are incongruous with the fact that the Igbo were not exterminated after the war ended, alongside other arguments such as a lack of clarity surrounding Nigerian intentions and that Nigeria was fighting to retain control of Biafra and its people rather than to expel or exterminate them. Biafra made a formal complaint of genocide against Igbos to the International Committee on the Investigation of Crimes of Genocide, a Paris-based NGO of international lawyers, which concluded that the actions undertaken by the Nigerian government against the Igbo amounted to a genocide. With special reference to the Asaba massacre, jurist Emma Okocha described the killings as the first black-on-black genocide. Ekwe places significant blame on the British government for their support of the Nigerian government, which he argued allowed for their depredations against the Igbo to continue. Reconstruction, helped by the oil money, was swift. However, the old ethnic and religious tensions remained a constant feature of Nigerian politics. Accusations were made of Nigerian government officials diverting resources meant for reconstruction in the former Biafran areas to their ethnic areas. Military government continued in power in Nigeria for many years, and people in the oil-producing areas claimed they were being denied a fair share of oil revenues. Laws were passed mandating that political parties could not be ethnically or tribally based. However, it has been hard to make this work in practice.
Igbos who ran for their lives during the pogroms and war returned to find their positions had been taken over. And when the war was over, the government did not feel any need to reinstate them, preferring to regard them as having resigned. This reasoning was also extended to Igbo-owned properties and houses. People from other regions were quick to take over any house owned by an Igbo, especially in the Port Harcourt area. The Nigerian government justified this by terming such properties abandoned. This, however, has led to a feeling of injustice as the Nigerian government policies were seen as further economically disabling the Igbos even long after the war. Further feelings of injustice were caused by Nigeria changing its currency so that Biafran supplies of pre-war Nigerian currency were no longer honored. At the end of the war, only £20 was given to any Easterner, regardless of the amount of money he or she had had in the bank. This was applied irrespective of their banking in pre-war Nigerian currency or Biafran currency. This was seen as a deliberate policy to hold back the Igbo middle class, leaving them with little wealth to expand their business interests. Fall of Biafra and restoration attempts. Further information. Orlu Crisis. On the 29th of May 2000, The Guardian reported that President Olusegun Obasanjo commuted to retirement the dismissal of all military persons who fought for the breakaway state of Biafra during the Nigerian Civil War. In a national broadcast, he said that the decision was based on the principle that justice must at all times be tempered with mercy. Biafra was more or less wiped off the map until its resurrection by the contemporary movement for the actualization of the sovereign state of Biafra. Chinua Achebe's last book, There Was a Country, A Personal History of Biafra, has also rekindled discussion of the war. In 2012, the indigenous people of Biafra, IPOB separatist movement was founded, led by Nnamdi Kanu. In 2021, tensions between IPOB and the Nigerian government escalated into the violent Orlu crisis, with IPOB declaring that the Second Nigeria-Biafra War had begun. The separatists vowed that this time, Biafra would win. Southeast Freedom Fight. Nnamdi Kanu's ascent to prominence and the meteoric rise of the indigenous people of Biafra, IPOB, is a complex narrative deeply intertwined with the socio-political fabric of Nigeria. Kanu, a charismatic and outspoken leader, gained attention through his vocal advocacy for the rights of the Igbo people and the call for an independent state of Biafra in southeastern Nigeria. His platform, IPOB, emerged as a formidable force, rallying support both within Nigeria and among the Igbo diaspora globally. The movement tapped into deep-seated grievances stemming from historical injustices, marginalization, and perceived neglect of the Igbo ethnic group within the Nigerian state. Kanu's ability to leverage social media and online platforms amplified his message, resonating with a significant segment of the Igbo population disillusioned with the Nigerian government. Despite facing legal challenges and government crackdowns, Kanu's influence continued to grow, symbolizing a resurgence of Biafran. Identity and aspirations for self-determination within Nigeria's complex political landscape. Intergenerational impacts. According to a 2021 study, war exposure among women in the Biafran War results in reduced adult stature, an increased likelihood of being overweight, earlier age at first birth, and lower educational attainment. War exposure of mothers has adverse impacts on next-generation child survival, growth, and education. Impacts vary with age of exposure. And that's a wrap for today's video. I hope you found it helpful and enjoyable. If you did, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and share it with your friends. Also, make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. If you have any questions or thoughts, drop them in the comments below. I love hearing from you. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Take care.